Good afternoon. Welcome to GoProcure's webinar. My name is Raghav Chand. I am a business analyst at GoProcure. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing your host, GoProcure's Executive Vice President, Roy Anderson. Roy is a senior procurement leader known for transforming organizations from having a focus on tactical, low-impact activities to high-value, holistic strategic solutions. He is an innovative leader in value creation across the supply chain. At GoProcure, Roy has provided a breakthrough gain-sharing managed service model that provides procure-to-pay technology and strategic sourcing. The model has delivered a CPO-audited 15% savings across millions of dollars of spend in billion-dollar organizations. He believes in driving governance, supplier innovation and collaboration, and a better communication with internal customers. Our webinar focuses on contract management. Any questions will be noted and answered at the end of the webinar. Now I'm handing it over to you, Roy.
All right, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. So let's talk a little bit about this whole contract management scenario. Interesting, when I was a CPO at John Hancock, I was told by a strategic sourcing consultant their 3-year sales plan for major corporations. They would basically come in and sell the CFO on the value of strategic sourcing. They would then go through the contract, they would do the bidding, negotiate, close out the contract, and show the CFO all the savings potential that they've been able to create for the corporation. They would then get paid handsomely and walk out the door, at which time the contract and all the work that went into it dropped down in terms of value down to nothing because the contract was neglected. 3 years later, that same strategic sourcing group would come back in, tell the new CFO the value of driving strategic sourcing, get the contract, go through the same process, and then they would see the same activity happen again as the contract was neglected and all the savings would go from potential to zero. This process was something that they would do over and over and over again because they found it so right on that people weren't doing good contract management. What we want to do in terms of contracting, as you all know, is that 60% of the effort is in the strategic sourcing. That means the value is created by doing all the work necessary to get a good competitive deal driven into a contract. But unfortunately, as we just showed with the consultant, if in fact you just stop there and move on to the next contract, which so many do, the contract falls into neglect. What we want to happen is move into a period of performance where over an 18-month period, not only do you not lose value, but you gain optimal value from that contract. But that's not all. That is just the bare minimum of what good contract management brings to the table. We want to ultimately end up where we have innovation and collaboration in the process. And by having that innovation and collaboration, you'll get exceedingly more value out of that contract because as time changes, as requirements change, as the capability of the supplier changes, you want to be able to accentuate that contract as much as possible. That top line is where we're talking about in terms of driving contract management across your organization. Now, we do know that contract management is not a standalone. It requires us to have a good process that leads to that. So it would be appropriate for us to at least spend a minute in contract management to talk about the lead up to that activity, which I call the fifth step. The UK audit organization came back and provided a basically 7-step solution set in terms of contract lifecycle. The first, the commercial strategy, is talking about holistic understanding of your requirements, making sure you have your internal customers on board, knowing what the full requirements of the solution set are. Second is to make sure you have a supply chain that can meet those requirements. You do the due diligence, do the research, find the areas of opportunity, and make sure you have those suppliers available. Then the fun part of creating that competitive tension with the suppliers and a clear, open, informative bid process that allows the suppliers to understand the requirements, communicate well with the internal customers, and then be able to present a solution set that they feel that they can provide the most value to you. Of course, you have to have the right contract in place. And that contract is got to be covering the requirements and obligations that are presented for the supplier and the internal customers, but also allow for the flexibility that we know we're going to have over time. Then we get into the fifth step of contract management. The focus of the rest of our presentation today to be able to optimize those contracts and be able to get the innovation and collaboration that's going to be able to give you the best results. Now, this would be an example of a poor contract. I believe what's happened is not only has he lost his car, he probably lost more than that. Sixth step, contract life cycle, is you have to be able to plan for uncertainty. There are scenarios that happen every single day because the contract lives in real life. There is constant change, uncertainty due to poor information, or just the challenge of being able to predict the future effectively. You've got to be able to plan for that uncertainty and open up the lines of communication with your internal customers and your suppliers in order to be able to manage through that. And then no matter what contract you have, at some point in time, whether it's a year, 5 years, 15 years, or whatever, or well past your experience there, you're going to have an end or a transition time. So you should always start your contracts with the end in mind. In terms of value of the contract management, we mentioned earlier on that the internal customer participation is crucial. I've been in organizations where the goal was to get as many contracts done as possible. So they would go in, find the data, and then be able to put it out to bid, get bidding, close the contract out, put it out on the shelf so that the contracts were completed. It does not mean the contracts were used, and it certainly didn't mean that the internal customers were fully a participant in that process. I have found those contracts that create the greatest value start with internal customers fully understand the requirements, looking at the holistic activity that we are going to be going after. That means all processes, all services, and all products that tie into that opportunity. That is good participation. At that point, you need that finance buy-in, the chief financial officer and or their team to be able to clearly understand the value of the holistic agreement, to be able to help you do the analysis, the cost analysis, the should cost analysis, be able to provide you the baseline and the budgeting that is developed and that goes into the expenses associated with that activity. Having the CFO buy in early on to explain what you're doing and why you're going to do it gives them the clear understanding that you're doing the right activity, that they can feel comfortable with that activity, and that they can be able to utilize the results in order to drive the next level of budgeting. A good contract that's with your legal team and your contracting manager, working with the suppliers to be able to make sure that you have the baseline set, the minimum expected results, and then the hope is you're going to use that contract to be able to launch into new ideas and new thoughts, but at least you have a baseline for how you're going to do business. And finally is the clear objectives and goals of that contract. What are you trying to accomplish? Are you clearly providing that expectation to the supplier? Does the internal customer know what they need to do to make that happen? So once you have clarity and communication in that space, you're going to be able to make sure that you have good contract management. I have found that in any contract, the key issue is to be able to control what you know you can control. Let go of all the stuff you can't control. Don't worry about that, but spend all of your time to master what you can control. And the number one controllable problem in any contract is your own obligations. These obligations that you've signed up to, and in most cases, it says, I'm going to provide you the spend necessary in order to be able to hit the savings numbers and the activity level to meet your obligations inside your company. Note that when you're talking to a salesperson and they go back to their organization to get price points, cost reductions, innovations, ideas that they are providing to the company, says, we're going to be moving this amount of spend into your organization, therefore that will allow you to have the cost structures to be able to provide the value to you, the buyer. You need to be able to meet those obligations. So what do they all mean? One, which is relatively simple but hard to do, is have your internal customers and your leadership team and yourself make timely decisions. Delays are difficult. Delays are hard for the supplier. It causes them to reprioritize the work in their area. There's only so much goodwill that's available. And if you're constantly pushing them so that they have to rush to meet your expectations, or they pushed off another client to meet your expectations, it makes it more and more difficult for you to get the optimal value. So make timely decisions, set a timeline, keep that timeline, work your internal groups to make sure that they can make those timely decisions as well. You also have to own the change management process. With a new contract, you're talking about potentially a new supplier, a new way of doing business, a new ordering process, potentially new products and services. All those require change inside your organization, requires communication and selling. As a procurement contract manager, half your job is selling the ideas and thoughts around that new contract so that you can gather all the individuals inside your organization and deliver them up with better results, better service levels, better pricing structure, and create an environment that everyone's happy. But that change management process is crucial. Do not underestimate the need to be able to manage that change. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, the key element, the key value proposition here is to be able to aggregate that spend and move it from whatever supply chain you had, whether it had contracts or not, into the new contract process that usually requires some level of procurement technology to support that effort. And you need to incorporate that technology into the process so that people find it easy to move from the old methodology to new methodology. I've always said that the biggest competitor to a good contract is the telephone, because the internal customer picks up the phone and then just makes a call to their best friend, which puts things outside the contract. So you have to have something better and easier than the phone. Be accurate in your forecast. Very few people are. Forecasts are really difficult to do. I'm working with a university space now, and they basically look at me anytime I talk about forecasts. It says, the change is happening too rapidly. There is not a good methodology for forecast. But if, in fact, even if you can give people a week or 2 weeks notice, giving them the information as early as possible, being as open as possible about that forecast, and then making the changes known to individuals allows you to have some level of trust in the process. The last of these 5 pieces on meeting your obligations is to understand how scope creep happens. Understand that it's literally a phone call, an email, a small conversation between two people that say, I think we can try doing it a little differently, or we can add a little to this, or we need a few more hours of that person's time. That scope creep adds up and multiplies. And it's important that you as the contract manager understand that scope creep, have a process for highlighting that scope creep, monetize that amount so that when change orders start to come in, you can be prepared with the appropriate negotiation in terms of how things give and take. But when the change occurs and it's an increase in cost structure, you can tell your internal customer that this is where it came from, this is why, it was their types of decisions to make that happen. Because scope creep is always painful when you have to start paying for it. Inside of a good contract, you also want to minimize disappointment. And in that, we do know on the bottom right-hand corner that there are sales promises. The sales force does not always provide the most accurate information as to the capabilities of the supplier. Frequently, it talks about the next generation, that utopia, that next release brings forward, and all things asked for will be in that next release. It's important that the contract manager knows the difference between promises and actual capabilities. The contract manager during the sourcing process should have done the due diligence so they have a better understanding of that supplier's capability and how closely it matches client expectations. But be very aware, client expectations come in 2 flavors. Things that they need that they document, and the things that they want that tend to be on the softer side, the futuristic side, those things that they want to have. Expectations and determinations are not only measured by what people need and document, but also about what they want. And it's up to the contract manager to be able to see that want and be able to understand how the supplier can meet those capabilities in order to make things as happy as possible. Of course, you have success where they all match, but the disappointment is those areas where there's not a match. And over time, not only do you want the right contract to be able to minimize that client disappointment, but you want to continue in contract management through innovation and collaboration and open communication to make sure that over time that client disappointment disappears, that the supplier capabilities or ancillary contracts that fit that requirement take care of the client disappointment so that that red area is as small as possible from the beginning all the way through to the end. Now, some of the problems that we have associated with this is the stress associated, and in most cases, it's due to lack of good communication. It is very important that we communicate as effectively as possible and eliminate ambiguous responsibilities. Those obligations that people are not aware that they own. It's confusing. It lets them off the hook in terms of what they're trying to accomplish. You'll find that poor project management also leads to that same level of communication, lack of communication. So it is important in the contract manager that you are acting as the project manager of this effort and that you're keeping the lines of communication open so the stress level goes down and therefore people start to respond more positively to the changes that are going to ultimately occur in any good contract. One of the areas that I found most effective in making sure there's clear communication is something called OGSM, which is Objectives of the Contract, which has a 3 to 5 year view. The goals of the contract, which are date and number. I'm going to provide you X amount by such and such a date, or I'm going to deliver a particular innovation by such a time frame. Those goals are crucial to make sure that you're going to meet your objectives in the long term. And then in order to hit those goals, you have to have strategies. That is the actions that you and your supplier and your internal customer are taking, that those actions lead to successful goals. And then if you measure those effectively, measure the results of those actions, you're going to be able to compare them against your goals and be able to have a very clear picture as to what you're trying to accomplish. Now, let me give you a little example. This happens to be a labor OGSM measurement chart, single page that you can put in for each of your objectives. The top left, you have the red line. That is the goal that was set up between you and your supplier and your CFO to say, we're going to deliver over $4.5 million over this coming year in auditable savings. The blue bar is the actuals that you've been able to document and get approval on. When the red line is above the blue bar, blue column, you know that you're below your goal. It is immediate, it's clear, everyone understands we're not hitting our expectations. You move over to the right side of the chart, it says, here's the actions that we're going to take to drive additional savings inside this process. This action list comes from the conversation with your supplier and your internal customers, and it include, in this example, for labor, things like expense reduction. Is there an opportunity for offshoring? Is there additional work that you can do by moving from consulting work to temp labor work? Can you move the program to a more cost-effective area? Can you increase the competition among the job sites that are out there? Are there costs that are being incorporated that we can pull out of the process? And of course, can we establish demand management practices so that people will only work for as long as they're approved to work and not have the scope creep that's there? Those actions, as you get from April to May, you can see those actions took advantage of additional savings and therefore crossed the line. Now you know you're hitting your number. And as you go from month to month, you can find out how well you're doing and then either provide new action plans or new emphasis on those action plans in order to hit your numbers. The lower half of the analysis is meant to just be an overview of the entire page. How are we doing? Everything's working well. Are there long-term or environmental issues that are impacting this process? All of those can be done on one page. I found that one page, CFOs like that because they can see on one page how well we're doing. Now, it's important as we go through a contract management process, not everything is going to be beautiful. There are going to be failures or there are going to be issues that come up. I have found, and I've told all of my teams in the procurement space, this is the easiest way, the fastest way, the most effective way is if there's a failure, you own that failure. It's your contract. You're supposed to make these things happen. Own that failure. Therefore, the team around you, therefore, looks to you to try to support you in making you more successful. So own the failures, and then when there is success, share that success across not only your team but to the management team, so everyone knows that you're a part of that team to support their efforts. In a good contract, you need to drive innovation. So you have the basics, the blocking and tackling, the pricing structures, the audits, the service levels, but it really gets down to the next level. To raise the value is to drive innovation. Ginny Rometty of IBM came back and said, if you're going to survive, you have to continuously transform. Continuous transformation is what makes you an innovation company. That continuous transformation has to include not only internal clients, employees, but also your external employees, your suppliers that have to continually drive innovation into your program so that you can be the company of innovation, because your suppliers are a bigger and bigger part of your organization. The question is whether or not you've created an environment of innovation. And what I mean by an environment is, do you personally, and do the people around you, do the engineers and product managers and line of business leaders accept innovation from suppliers? Are they looking for the suppliers to deliver new results, new product mixes, cost reduction solutions that's going to be able to lift up the program more effectively? So you have to be accepting of the environment, just the wording. And when you have an innovation, are you bringing it forward? And is there a team that you can present it to? And does the team have responsibilities and actions and their goals to be able to deliver on those acceptances? That's how suppliers feel comfortable and build up the trust associated with handing you some of their most innovative processes. I see it at times, and I've been in companies where innovation is not accepted. They don't really want it. They have too much to do. They're just trying to get their everyday job done. And they actually build a moat, the whole castle concept, bows and arrows to shoot anyone that comes near you. But they'll still put out the sign that we welcome your ideas, and wonder why there's no suppliers that will come in and provide them innovative solutions. It's because they know they put all this time and effort into it, and it's dead on arrival. There's no way they're going to get it passed, and therefore they gave the best ideas up. They spent the time on it, but no one takes action on it. And worst case is a scenario I had where a CPO, I presented them a number of ideas from the supply base. They said, oh, this is good. Let me go bid that out to other suppliers. Basically ruining the trust and showing every supplier that this organization will take your innovative ideas and get it right out to the supply base to see if somebody else can do it better. That's not how you build trust. That's not how you build an innovative organization. That's not how you build an environment that accepts innovation from your suppliers. Another area of innovation is analysis. So this happens to be a lab supply analysis of all the categories within lab supplies. And the analysis that was done by the supplier, and they did a phenomenal job, is to separate the spend into things that were difficult to change and those were not so difficult to change. Therefore, you can target the low difficulty areas and be able to drive a solution that you get some wins on. You start to build momentum, you build the wins, and then you move to the more moderate difficulty, and then get to the things that are potentially the highest savings items, but those that are most difficult to install. So therefore, you can build the wins, build momentum, and build the trust within the organization. Back to an OGSM, people sit there and say, well, it's easy to do a measurement or goals on numbers such as unit price or cost savings, but can you do the same in terms of service levels? And I believe if you do it correctly and you understand and can define service levels you're looking for, that you can create the same environment. So here we have the same scenario that we created a goal that would have a survey response at 8.5. That if in fact we can hit 8.5, we know that we're doing a good job. Then over time we may want to increase that to 9 or 9.5. But we've set a goal. We know where we stand in terms of that baseline. We know what actions we have to take. In this case, on the left-hand side, the actions to promote the activity, to share the information with the reps, provide more communication, and we'd be able to have the opportunity to then improve upon that service level, that survey, so people feel comfortable. What I find is that if you can receive information from your internal customers and be able to communicate back to them how you've incorporated that and the changes that have been made because of their input, they trust you. And therefore, they're more than willing to provide you more information and therefore feel better about the whole program, that they are an instrumental part of that solution set. And therefore, the trust and the value and the acceptance has grown because of the way that you go about driving this project management. Understand early on that this is all about change and change management, but people are afraid of change. They are afraid of change, and I'm sure you've heard it. I've heard it in any program that I put in place. There's always someone, if not a lot of someones, that talk about, will I lose my job? Now, we have to sit back and realize we're driving cost savings. But I'll tell you, when you deal with process management, and it's not just a unit price reduction from the supplier, but when you're talking about cost reduction in a process, the majority of the cost has to do with people, having fewer and fewer labor hours involved in that end-to-end process. I use a concept called simplify, eliminate, automate. People quickly realize that once you've simplified the process and eliminated the value list, that the E in that eliminate tends to be people, and those people are them. They quickly know if they're the person that could have a risk, and they actually go through a grief curve. They look at this saying, wait a minute, you're doing this to me. You're trying to have me lose my job. That's not fair. I think you're bad. And they actually go through a grief curve. And what you need to do is be able to see the people that are going to be impacted from this. Some think they're being impacted, but they aren't. Others will be impacted. And you need to be able to go back to them and their managers and show them where there's a light at the end of the tunnel, where there's other opportunities as the company is growing, where as you get more efficient, you can pick up more responsibility and become more valuable to the organization. People over time go from being pained to see a way out of the process to actually becoming a supporter of the process. They actually get to the point where they're going, you know what, this was pretty good. I like that you communicated with me. I like that you made it easy for me. And all of a sudden, they're one of your biggest supporters. And I found those to be the people that I count on as change continues. Now, GoProcure in our contract management, we tend to start with being the voice of the customer, understand their key drivers, being a partnership with those suppliers and internal customers, and developing quarterly business reviews. And I'll tell you, quarterly business reviews should not be something that's a slam dunk. They are difficult. The quarterly business reviews are meant to challenge people to reach out to the new objectives and goals, to be able to measure them accurately, and to be honest with each other where we're not meeting those activities. It's really important to have that third-party view to make sure that you get the best possible results. I also feel focus groups with the internal customers to get the voice of the customer is key to the success. Creating auditability, benchmarking, savings tasks, and then try to drive the innovation in the contract. Challenge people to think outside the box. Those are some of the things that we do at GoProcure. And Raghav, why don't we stop here and take some questions? Did you get any questions during the session?
Hi, Roy. I actually did get a couple of questions. One of them was my annual goals are to be able to close $15 million in contracts this year. This causes me to jump from contract to contract in a limited time frame. How do I better manage my contracts?
Yeah, that's a good question. The scenario there is working with your manager. You need to be able to understand what is possible to get the job done. And as a CPO, I've handed out tasks to my teams and goals to my teams that were challenging to be nice about it. But I also told them that they have to prioritize. That if you have, for example, a $15 million of contracts, you want to look at those contracts and prioritize those that have opportunity for value creation. And what I mean by that is either strategic sourcing can significantly lower the total cost, or good contract management could create collaboration and innovation results. And you're always going to have that balance of those that value is not going to be created. There's mediocre value creation, and there where there's high value creation. What I suggested to you on the medium and low, extend those contracts. They all need to be done, but they don't have to be done today. They're not as high a priority as those that are going to drive higher value. So extend those contracts out 1 year, 2 years, even if you need to, 3 years if you have to, so that you can focus your time and attention on those that are going to have the greatest value. I'll tell you now, doing a very good job on those high value items are going to deliver the results that are going to make the difference. At the end of the year, they did not ask you, did you strategically source all of those contracts? They said, look at the value you created by being so good and focused. So that's how you separate, you prioritize, and you focus your attention either on strategic sourcing into contract management or where contracts are already there and you can do better contracts. Raghav?
Another question that was asked was, can you really show savings on innovation programs?
That's a really good question. What I have found to be effective, and this is why I mentioned earlier about you have to get the chief financial officer involved or his organization, his or her organization involved. And I mentioned something about a toll gate process. Toll gate one, define the opportunity. That's a part of setting up the requirements in the contract and the strategic sourcing process. But define, is this going to impact receiving, inventory management? It's going to impact the labs. Is it going to impact results? Is it potentially going to impact new businesses going forward? Are there labor efforts to be able to streamline? Is it a unit cost type of element? Can you find the costs in the program that you can eliminate in the process? So if you can define the opportunity, holistic management of the cost structures, and present that to the CFO so they see all the elements that are going to be impacted by this new contract process, then the CFO is bought into the fact that this is a need and an area of opportunity, and they monetize that opportunity. They go back and say, this could be worth X number of dollars in costs or new marketing or new programs or new revenue streams. Once you go through the process and manage the contract effectively, drive the innovation that you planned, put in the OGSM process in place that says, here's our goal to get to that level that the CFO signed off on. Here's all our actions. You can actually have the CFO's organization and the line of business come back in and sign off saying, I see that savings. I see the change that occurred in the cost per hour or the cost per widget. So by showing that and clearly identifying it and getting their buy-in on the front page, on the front tollgate one, tollgate two, they sign off says, I see the savings. And whether that is increased service levels or costs or any of those others that I define. And then tollgate three, you incorporate those savings and the CFO can then say, well, is this a budget issue? Is this how do I change where the money's moving so the money actually gets to the bottom line? I always laugh when people say the savings immediately go to the bottom line. Well, the savings could go to the bottom line, but if in fact they're not documented well enough, they get spent in other places, which is still a good thing, but it's not the bottom line anymore. All right, Raghav, do you have another question? We have one time for one more, I think.
The last question is actually about the OGSM. It goes, do you have to have measurements for all your goals and objectives?
And that's an easy one. The answer is no. What you want to do is pick the two or three that are most impactful to you, have an OGSM for those two or three. Once you've hit those goals and things are working well, then maybe you can take your spotlight off those a bit and move to others. But once again, prioritize your work. Raghav, I think that's all the time we have. Thanks for your efforts. Back to you.
Okay, so thank you for joining us for the webinar. We will send you a recording of the webinar as well as a presentation on contract management. If you have any further questions about contract management or GoProcure, please email us at info@goprocure.com. We hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.